To quote Jane Austen, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that the Outer Worlds is fucking terrible." You might think that's hypocritical given how much I've been glazing Fallout 1 and Bloodlines, but the fact Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky made a couple of good games 20, 30 years ago has nothing to do with the products they're pushing out today, because that's all they are. Shallow imitations, products. The Outer Worlds is a soulless game, and as I've been banging on about for years, hollow in the same way as the corporations it tries so hard to parody. If you were to ask a computer to approximate a video game, every possible design trope, and what the gamers really want nowadays, this is the kind of thing you'd expect to see. The comparison to AI is fitting because the game is so utterly sterile, devoid of personality or charm, and shows that Obsidian, Tim Kaine, Leonard Boyarsky, and everyone else involved with flogging this joke of a game completely lack self-awareness. All they did was produce the same kind of product they were trying to parody. The fact it traded on the Bethesda bad hype train at the time, when the only thing it deserves is to be forgotten with the rest of the shovelware in a bargain bin somewhere, or how the game tries to veil itself in irony and a wink at the camera, it's frankly pathetic. The open world feels like a soundstage with everyone half-heartedly trying to play their part. Bandits have no reason to exist. They're literally fodder for gameplay purposes and stand literally just down the road from settlements. Loot is recycled down to the same model across weapons. It is the laziest possible game design of number go up. The companions are a joke, and don't even get me started about the story or how it tries to do the New Vegas thing right at the very end. But it's okay, guys. It's New Vegas in space, right? Right? One of the biggest copes to emerge in the last decade or so is the re-emergence of developers that once made good games and the idea that they will do so again. You can blame Kickstarter for this, and as I've been over many times before, Pillars of Eternity was one of the big stories to come out of this period. I think there's a direct correlation we can draw with the rise of remake culture as well. The idea that more and more of the industry has become creatively bankrupt, and like some kind of consumerist Ouroboros has begun to eat itself. What is happening at the moment is that because audiences are so desperate for good, genuine storytelling or art, they've unconsciously fallen into a trap of putting their faith in people who are, frankly, well past their time. If there's any takeaway from this video, it's this: one person doesn't make or break a studio or game. That is ignoring the circumstances, the entire team behind them, and the time or place in which it was made. It's nostalgia bait to a T, not of products, but people. Star Citizen is fascinating and really the best or worst example we could point to. Space Sims and the idea of trucking across a one-to-one scale of a galaxy doesn't exactly excite me, but Chris Roberts obviously had a huge pull in building what is the biggest sunk cost fallacy in gaming history. Star Citizen has been going for a decade at this point, and despite what its fans may delude themselves into thinking, after paying $10,000 real dollars for a ship cosmetic, it is still little more than walking around a cinematic render in Unreal Engine. You're welcome to disagree, but I'd encourage you to maybe finish writing your comments when the next $100 million pours in. I don't fault the developers themselves per se. In many cases, it's clear this comes from a genuine place of passion and wanting to make the best game they can, but a hope and a prayer doesn't really help translate it into reality, does it? Let's look at probably the most egregious example, and the one I personally found most disappointing, next. OtherSide Entertainment. Unless you're really into classic PC games or immersive sims, you probably haven't heard of Looking Glass Studios, also known as Blue Sky Productions, but the impact this studio had on game design can be seen everywhere in the industry today. Thief the Dark Project essentially created the stealth genre, and still to this day was so far ahead of its time in how it used sound cues and lighting that gaming now takes for granted. System Shock was the first-person spin on the Metroidvania and introduced the legendary sound work of Eric Brosius and Terry Brosius as one of the best villains in gaming, Shodan. The sequel, made in collaboration with this little-known developer named Irrational Games and Ken Levine, is a landmark for good reason. It standardized so many things we take for granted nowadays as a pioneer of the FPS RPG hybrid, and additions like audio logs, To make a long story short, as is often the case with any creative industry, Looking Glass had once-in-a-generation talent, but not the financial success to last. When it went under, creatives like Warren Spector went on to work on other legendary games like Deus Ex. Fast forward to the Kickstarter boom, and the key creative minds behind Ultima Underworld, System Shock, or Deus Ex had founded their own studio again and promised the return of some of the titans of the industry. Unsurprisingly, this did not, in fact, happen. OtherSide Entertainment, as it came to be called, is probably the worst case I can think of over-promising and under-delivering. If you haven't heard of Ultima Underworld, it was so important and successful at the time, it literally inspired Doom and countless dungeon crawler, sandbox-style games that would follow in its wake. Simply having 20, 30 years of experience behind you doesn't mean anything though, because its spiritual reboot, Underworld Ascendant, was a buggy, uninspired mess. Yet another Kickstarter failure that had about as much impact as a pillow fight in space. What really gutted me though was the worst case of blueballing ever in the catastrophic development around System Shock 3. At least we'll always have this render of Shodan, but Warren Spector, Paul Neurath, Terry Brosius, and all the other clearly talented people involved doesn't mean that necessarily results in a great game, or anything apparently, since the IP has since been bought up by Tencent, if that wasn't depressing enough. Finally, we come to Archetype Entertainment and the promise of Exodus. I really hope this game is amazing. I want to believe it will be, but just because James Olin or Drew Karpyshyn are involved, that doesn't mean anything by itself. If you don't know who they are, James Olin was the creative director behind basically all of BioWare's legendary run of games: Baldur's Gate, Knights of the Old Republic, and of course, Dragon Age Origins. Karpyshyn was the lead writer on many of these as well, although I won't ever forget what he did to Revan and the Exile in that crappy MMO. He's clearly very talented. The problem, as we've seen already, is whether this is going to translate into a game that is actually good by its own merits. Game development doesn't exist because of rock stars. John Romero with Daikatana, Peter Molyneux with literally anything, Todd Howard working on IPs that he had no hand in actually creating. One person does not determine success any more than the idea that because someone once made a good game, everything they touch turns to gold. Wizards of the Coast as the financial backing behind Archetype sounds nice in theory. Everyone loves a good underdog story, and the idea that because BioWare devs are now out from under EA's thumb, there will be this big heroic comeback that restores faith in the industry now that Mass Effect and Star Wars are dead and buried. From what we've seen so far though, it just looks average. Maybe it's just me, but a cinematic third-person shooter in the vein of Mass Effect is great in theory. Maybe it will be more inspired and the team really is just dropping teasers for now, but there are warning signs already. It's already trying to be a cross-media franchises with books, the secret level episode, and overly flashy visuals, where it should just be focusing on the game itself. Like I said, I really hope the game is going to be a masterpiece, but if the point of this video hasn't made it clear already, you should keep your expectations low. Just because members of Team Silent are involved, it still resulted in the remake, or even worse, Nightcry. Just because Shinji Mikami was involved, it still resulted in The Evil Within. Just because Itagaki was involved, it still led to the edgiest game ever, Devil's Third. Just because David Gator was involved, it still led to Anthem. Just because Mark Darrah was involved, it still led to Veilguard. Just because Amy Hennig was involved, it still led to Forspoken. Just because Hideo Kojima is involved? Well, just look for yourself. One person doesn't make the game. The whole studio does.